All right, it is 2:15, so we're going to get started. So thanks everybody for coming. My name's Tristan Davis. I'm the Group Program Manager of the Office Extensibility team, and this is Rob Howard. Rob, you want to show?
I lead the Office Ecosystem Marketing team, so I'm going to pretend my best engineering impression at the moment.
Rob's an engineer. And for the next hour and 15 minutes, Rob and I wanted to really give you guys an introduction to the Office 365 developer platform. Some of you have probably been at these sessions before. We're going to spend the next hour and 15 kind of showing you all the great new stuff we're doing and really helping you understand the breadth of the platform and all the things we've just added to it. We're really hopefully going to give you a good sense of how you can take advantage of all these components so that, Office 365 comprises a large number of applications with just a ton of awesome ways to integrate a bunch of great APIs. We want you to go away feeling like you know how you can use those to accomplish business objectives. And we want to point you to a ton of other sessions. Like the one thing you're going to see in the next hour and 15 minutes is we're going to go at a breakneck pace through a ton of demos on a bunch of really interesting topics and point you at sessions that are going to spend dedicated hours on each of those topics. So please, if you see something you're excited about, go spend time with that speaker. We've got a ton of experts here in Orlando with you guys to kind of drill on anything you're passionate about that you see from us today as we run through the whole gamut of what Office 365 looks like.
Yeah, we're really just going to scratch the surface in the demos today. We've got, 31 sessions throughout the week for Office developers, so please do check them out.
Ton of cool content. But to contextualize everything you're going to see, we wanted to start by talking about the opportunity. So why are Rob and I so passionate about the Office 365 developer platform? Why are we so excited about all the things we're building on top of it? Why do we really want you guys to take away all that enthusiasm and go to all those other sessions throughout the week? And really, it splits into two things. One, there's a huge developer opportunity. You know that there's over 100 million monthly active users of Office 365 in commercial environments. Office 365 is where people get work done, right? Hours and hours of folks' time every day is spent in the applications that comprise the Office 365 system, which creates a huge opportunity to attach custom solutions to that time, right? I don't want to have to get a user out of Outlook to go get something done. I want them to get that something done without having to switch applications in the first place. Really leveraging the really habitual workflows that already exist inside of Office to attach all the custom workflows, custom solutions that I go and build. That pairs with just a ton of data. You can see there those sort of ginormous numbers that we have, the 4 trillion plus emails that get sent with Office 365, the 3 billion minutes of Skype calls that happen every day, the 2 billion meetings created a month, which both Rob and I joke, a lot of them are on our calendars. So there's just a lot of data, really valuable business data getting created in Office 365, which the platform also lets you access. So I can go and pull all those signals, all that data to go and build really interesting solutions. And all that adds up to over 8 trillion nodes in the Microsoft Graph. You heard Satya this morning, you saw Li Chen demo, you'll see us do a bunch of demos. The Graph is this incredibly powerful resource because it knows who's Tristan emailing, who's he having meetings with, what documents is he working on, who does he work most closely with. And you can mine all that data through a bunch of really interesting, intelligent APIs that get built on the Microsoft Graph. And then in terms of the actual ecosystem, over 15,000 new apps are created a month that connect to Office 365. So a ton of developers are just jumping on and building interesting solutions for every possible business need on top of our applications and services. We have over 250,000 deployments of add-ins through our O365 centralized deployment feature. So at Build this year, we announced you can deploy add-ins using the Office 365 admin experience. We already have over 250,000 people who have an add-in through that. 400% growth in share of users using a third-party app. Office 365 itself is growing at a pretty phenomenal pace. And this is growing even bigger than that, right? So developers are really en masse migrating to take advantage of both the applications and the services and APIs that we built. And over double in terms of monthly active users of Graph apps in the last year.
Triple.
Over triple. Rob's the mathematician. He's right, 200% is triple. Thank you.
So hopefully Tristan gave you a great idea of why you'd want to go build for the platform, whether you're building a product that you're going to sell to customers or solutions for people within your organization. We think it's a really powerful opportunity. We want to give you a quick overview of what's the breadth of the different things that make up the Office platform. What are all the different places that you can go write code or take tools to go build solutions. So we've started to kind of create this new pitch about the breadth of the Office 365 platform in the cloud. We've used this one for kind of a couple months now, and it really starts with the Microsoft Graph, because we think that is such a core part of the value proposition of our developer platform. And that really, at its core, started with people. The first part of the Microsoft Graph that was in there was the directory. Users, the groups that they were in, their organizational hierarchy. And people really found that valuable for all kinds of applications. You know, if you want to have a workflow and you want to route it to somebody's manager, it's useful to have an API to go do that. We found that that wasn't enough. People wanted to get to that people information, but they also wanted to get to all the other information in Office 365 at the same time. So the documents that they're actually approving as part of that, or the meetings that they're in where they're going to have those discussions. So we started to take things like content, like the files that are stored in OneDrive or the meetings that are on your Outlook calendar, and make them available through that same API, and make them very easy to access through a single endpoint and navigate between the relationships of them. So you could go to a user, you could see all their files, you could see who modified it last, you could see who their manager was, and do those kind of navigations very quickly and easily because it was this graph. We then added in things like conversations. Our conversation platform is increasingly a part of this. The mails that people send between one another, the conversations that people have in Teams are now part of the Microsoft Graph. The universal communications meeting link on a online meeting is now part of the Microsoft Graph. So it's all part of this unified API. And then based on all of that data, the most important piece comes in, which is the insights that we're able to generate based on all that activity, all of the behavior inside of our products. We can see that Tristan and I are often in meetings together, or we email one another a lot. That's a great signal that we work with one another often. And when Tristan writes a document, if I work with him a lot, I probably want to know about that. Or if I actually say, hey, I want to meet with Tristan, rather than the hundreds, I don't know how many Tristans are at Microsoft, at least a couple dozen probably. Rather than the dozens of other Tristans at Microsoft, the Microsoft Graph can tell me, oh, you're probably talking about this Tristan, because he's the one that you work with most often. So the Microsoft Graph has all of this data, and then all the insights that we're powering our first-party services with are also available here in the Graph. And we take all of that data and we make them available through a single API endpoint. And on top of that, we build our own experiences. You see them as canvases here. I'll talk about that in just a second. We also make it possible for you to build your own standalone web, device, and service applications on top of that, and to connect directly into that API. So if you have a web application and you want to know where somebody's next meeting is or who their manager is, you can call the Microsoft Graph in order to embed that insight into your own application. Within Office, we talk about our canvases. And these are user experiences that are built for very specific user intents. Things like authoring documents, or having conversations, creating pages for sites and portals. And we think we have the best-in-class canvases for all of these different purposes across the Office 365 suite. You can think of things like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint when you think of document authoring. You can think of things like Teams and Outlook when you think of conversations. But we don't sort of limit it to specific applications. Even if you think about things like the review comments in the margin of a document, that's also a conversation. And as a developer, we want you to think about targeting that conversation, thinking about it as a unit, and not having to worry about whether that's appearing in Outlook or inside of Teams, or whether it's appearing inside on a Windows device or in the browser on a Mac device. We want you to think about it at this kind of canvas level. Some of those canvases we also take and make available to be embedded in your own application. So if you want to take a Skype for Business, voice, video, IM conversation, and you want to embed it in your own application, we have the Skype for Business SDKs to do that. If you want to take the best-in-class authoring experiences for Word, Excel, PowerPoint documents, you can embed them in your own application through the Cloud Storage Partner Program. So we have ways to take some of our canvases and embed them in your own application so you can make them a part of your custom business process. And then within our canvases, we have the notion of extensions, where you want to teach our canvases something new that it doesn't natively know how to do. And sometimes that takes the form of things that are very consistent across these canvases. So things like buttons or commands, task panes, dialogues, those make sense in the same way across all of those different canvases. But sometimes we talk about things that are very specific to a canvas. So if you think about a bot or a connector, for example, where I'm inserting a new item into a conversation, that's really specific to the conversation canvas. And when you go build one of those, we want to say, yeah, you can go build a connector, and it's going to work the same way across all the different places where our conversation canvases sit, whether that's Outlook or Teams, and regardless of the platform that it sits on. And then the kind of last piece of the platform is this notion of custom content. And we think that there's kind of a spectrum of needs here, where sometimes you have very simple content, and you want us to actually do all of the work in order to create the rendering of it. So we have things like actionable messages, where you take some JSON and you give us, here's the title, and here are the options that I want to have. And you can use that to create things like custom polls inside of Microsoft Teams or inside of Outlook, where you're just giving us the question and then the options for people to vote on, and we'll handle adapting that to the user interface. Sometimes you want to do things like custom visualizations inside of a Word document. And when you do that, we think you need every last pixel. You need control over every last HTML control on the page. So we have a very flexible model. The consistent thing across all of these is that they're all based on web technologies. So they work regardless of the platform that you're running on. You can use the same add-in on your Windows machine, as your Mac machine, as your iPad machine, or in the browser. So it's all based on web technologies across the entire spectrum, regardless of what your needs are. So that's the extent of the platform. We've got the graph, our data layer. We build our own experiences on top of it. We make it available to you. We've got our embeddable canvases that you can put inside of your own applications. You can extend our canvases with new behaviors, or you can teach our canvases about new custom types of content that they can put inside of the canvas. How do you actually take advantage of the value of that? How do you actually go and realize the value of all of those different opportunities within the Office 365 platform? Well, the simplest and easiest way is to go get a package solution. If there's somebody out there who has already built a solution that does what you need, we've got the Office Store, we've got App Source, we've got a place for you to go browse thousands of solutions that developers have already built, and you can go grab one off the shelf. You can deploy it through centralized deployment to your entire organization. It can meet your needs that way. The next step up would be to say, hey, I actually don't want to write a whole bunch of custom code, but I want to take a tool like PowerApps and Flow, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and I want to use some no-code design tools in order to create a custom business application that's more tailored to my needs or the needs of my specific organization. And I want to do that without having to write any custom code. We're also creating the notion of what we call reference solutions, where we think that there are a bunch of solutions that are common across industries or horizontal business processes, and we think they fit really well with Office 365. And so we're creating those in open source repositories where you can take those solutions, you can adapt them, you can customize them if you need to, and you can deploy them within your own organization. And they show you how we think you can take those business processes and model them in a way that's deeply integrated with Office 365. And then, of course, you can do completely custom development. You can take all the pieces, all the building blocks that we're giving you, and you can start from scratch and build your own thing that's really innovating and pushing the envelope in terms of customizing Office 365 to the needs of your business or your customer's business. So we're going to start with that notion of a package solution. You saw the Office 365 platform. I showed a bunch of different components. I talked about a bunch of different tools, and then I talked about package solutions. One way that makes it a little bit easier to come to life is to actually demo one of these package solutions for you. So I'm going to demo a solution called Decisions. And Decisions is, in some ways, a really simple solution. It's an extension to Outlook. So I'm going to go into Outlook. I'm going to go and schedule a meeting here. You can see I've got my new meeting form up. You can see that Decisions has extended this canvas with a new button. In the top, it's got a Meeting Secretary button. And I can click this button. It's going to open a task pane. That task pane is actually going to connect to the graph and sign me in, understand the groups that I'm a member of, and I can choose that I want to schedule a meeting, for example, for the management team. It'll use the JavaScript API for Outlook in order to insert that into the to-line so it can interact directly with that. It'll look for the meeting subject. So I'll say monthly sync meeting and hit OK. It's going to connect to Exchange to get information about that group, and it's going to grab templates that are available for me. So it's got a notion of meeting agendas. I can choose a specific meeting agenda template, like our management team meeting. It'll offer me this custom meeting agenda. So it's extending the notion of a meeting inside of Outlook with a formal agenda. I can even do things like, if I can shake the windows off, I can even do things like drag and drop items onto, or files onto the agenda item. It's going to use the graph in order to put that into the OneDrive for Business associated with this group. I can hit publish, that I want to go ahead and publish this meeting agenda to the attendees. It'll embed a link inside of my meeting. I can go and view it. And this is a standalone web application that Decisions has created in order to track the agenda for a particular meeting. And it's again going to use the graph in order to find out information about the meeting, who's been invited. It'll connect to its own system in order to show the notion of these agenda items. And then it'll even do things like connect to the graph so that I can track minutes inside of OneNote. It'll take all the information about who is invited, it'll take information about the agenda and the action items, and it'll actually embed it using the graph inside of a OneNote notebook in the group in Office 365 that I have associated with that meeting. And you can see that I can, right within OneNote, I can take the notes alongside the meeting as it happens. So it's a pretty simple solution in some ways. It makes sense. It's sort of in context of scheduling the meeting, but it's adding a whole new capability, this notion of a structured agenda to Office 365 and really tailoring Outlook and its standalone website for the purposes of that structured agenda meeting. And it's connected to the graph, so it's able to integrate with a bunch of different pieces of data in Office 365 to create a really complete experience around that meeting. So that's a real quick example of a package solution. And this is one of, like I said, a couple thousand solutions that you can go get in AppSource or in the Office store. Let's move on to the second thing we talked about. We talked about PowerApps in Flow. How many people here have used PowerApps in Flow before?
Awesome.
Awesome. Almost half. That's great. So for those of you who haven't, I definitely recommend you check it out. It's a really cool tool for rapid application development, for no-code development of mobile and web applications and simple workflows. It can connect to all of the services in Office 365. It can also connect to a bunch of services outside of Office 365. And you can even create custom connectors to connect to line of business systems, on-premises databases, things like that. I'm going to show you a real quick demo of one of my favorite new features of PowerApps, PowerApps Forms. PowerApps also has a really great integration with SharePoint. So if you haven't seen it, in SharePoint Online, if you go to any list or library in SharePoint Online, you'll actually see on the toolbar one of our very few commands. We think this is that important. One of our very few commands is you'll see Flow and PowerApps embedded right there. And if I hit the PowerApps dropdown, you've always had this notion of creating an app. And this would actually create a Power App, a mobile or web application that's connected to that SharePoint list as its backend data source. But what we actually see here is a new option here, Customize Forms. And this is actually allowing me to take Power Apps and customize the forms for this SharePoint list and push them back into SharePoint. So when I create a new item or I edit an item in SharePoint, it's going to use my customized version of Power Apps instead. This is a new capability. Power Apps is taking on more and more of our sort of no-code app creation workflow. This is what you'll get if you run that. It'll go automatically deep link into Power Apps. You'll see a designer that looks kind of like PowerPoint. The idea is that it's a very accessible way to create applications that interact with data, in this case in SharePoint. If I click on the form, for example, I can see the data that it's connected to. You'll see the demo SharePoint list. I can add other data sources, so I can pull in any data source that Flow or Power Apps can connect to, which is hundreds of data sources, on-premises data sources, cloud data sources, some from Microsoft, others from outside of Microsoft. There are literally hundreds of them, and I can add new connections in there to do that. I can do things like customize the layout, so I can make it 2 columns or 3 columns instead of 2. I can do horizontal or vertical. I can do things like add new fields in, and it's aware of the SharePoint list schema, so it sees things like location and contact email. If I check that, it'll automatically in. I can move the field around. I can change how it's rendered. I can even do things like advanced options where I can set things like expressions that express the default value that should be used in this particular form, or create rules about the behavior and the way that these fields relate to one another. So there's some really powerful things that I can do now inside of Power Apps to customize the way that a form works inside of SharePoint, along with all the other capabilities that Power Apps have always been able to do connected to Office 365 services. So the way that this presentation kind of works is we talk about, here's the full set of things that are in Office 365, here's the different tools that you have, and in each kind of stanza, we want to take a step back and talk about what's new. What are the announcements? What's coming soon? And then we want to talk about the sessions that you should go see if you want to learn more about it. So for Power Apps in Flow, there are a few things in particular about the Office 365 platform that are new. You just saw that custom forms in Power Apps capability, which we think is really powerful, really an exciting one to be able to do more customization of forms in SharePoint in the cloud with a no-code tool. We're also working on a Power Apps web part so that you can create a Power App, embed it anywhere in SharePoint Online using that web part. And Power Apps are also embeddable inside of Teams. You can go inside of Teams and create a new tab and pick from your organization's Power Apps to put them in the context of Teams. On the Flow side, we're integrating Flow deeply with OneDrive, so it's already integrated with document libraries in SharePoint, but now from OneDrive you can actually go and create a new flow or kick off a new flow directly from the OneDrive user interface. There's a new flow launch panel, so you can actually prompt users for information about the workflow that you're going to kick off as part of the initiation of it. There's a built-in workflow now based on Flow to do document or item review inside of SharePoint. And there's now a custom approval action, which is a modern approval action that leverages things like actionable messages inside of Outlook, but it lets you customize the behavior of that approval. So there's some really awesome stuff, a lot of work going on between the PowerApps team and especially the SharePoint and OneDrive team. And there's some very cool capabilities for building these business apps across the two that are launching over the next few months. There are a bunch of sessions that I recommend going and checking out if you want to learn more about PowerApps. In particular, this middle one here, Chris McNulty, Robert Berg, and Karam Yusaturk on Tuesday, 4 o'clock. That's going to be a really awesome 75-minute session where they're going to go through all of this stuff in a ton of detail. So you'll see all of the information about how to take advantage of those in that session there. We also talked about reference solutions. So remember, this is the notion that there's a bunch of business processes that we think are common ones that are really, they really sing when they're integrated deeply with Office 365. And sometimes those are industry opportunities. So if you think about traditional knowledge workers, they're financial services solutions or healthcare solutions where we think if you create a tailored experience connected to Office 365, you can have a much better experience. Or in the case of first-line workers, which is really an important new audience for us where we're creating tailored solutions both within our products and through the ecosystem to help make sure that every worker in the modern workforce has a solution. We've got a bunch of scenarios that we've identified that are ones that we think are really great scenarios to work with Office 365. And we are building or have built reference solutions for those industry ones, as well as many horizontal opportunities. Your legal department or your human resources department or your finance department. We think there's a bunch of processes that are better when they're integrated deeply in Office 365. When we do this, we really like to have a customer that we work with so that we know it's a real solution, that we can actually say, hey, we've gone and built one of these, we validated that it really works, they've got a real deployment built on top of it. And so one of the cool examples that we built was actually with the Microsoft Finance team. They have a problem where every quarter they've got to report Microsoft's earnings, and there are some actual legal liabilities to making sure that every number in all of your papers that you file every quarter are accurate. And so you can imagine that there's a lot of work that goes into analyzing everything that's submitted as part of those filings in order to make sure that they agree with the official numbers. So what we did was we took an Excel spreadsheet, we created an add-in in Office 365, we allowed you to tag items in that Excel spreadsheet and then use those in order to create all of the downstream documents and keep them in sync with the data in that canonical Excel spreadsheet. And we've created that solution, we call it SmartLink, and we've open sourced it so anybody can take that solution and deploy it within their own organization or create their own offerings on it. And I'm going to hand it over to Tristan. He's going to do a quick demo of what that solution looks like.
Yeah, let me show you guys what SmartLink looks like. So first, just as Rob said, we've done this with a bunch of different parts of Microsoft. So for example, last year our legal department came to us and said, well, our problem is keeping all of the matter related to a legal case in one place. For that, we open sourced a solution we call Matter Center. So you can see here, it's just on GitHub. You can go up, you can clone that repo, you can start to modify it, you can go and take it to meet your specific needs. For the exact same purpose, for our finance department, we went off and built Project SmartLink. So you'll see there's a session on Thursday where Daniel Canning will go into a bunch of detail about SmartLink, but let me give you a really quick demo. So like Rob said, the problem that the finance department had was, man, there's a set of canonical numbers, then they need one source of truth. We can't have 40 Word documents and 30 spreadsheets that maybe have slightly different numbers because there's specific obligations around those. So with the SmartLink add-in, you can see here it's just a standard modern web-based Excel add-in. I can go and pick parts of my Excel spreadsheet. So I've already picked the revenue field up here and the non-GAAP revenue field down here. And I've said, okay, that's the source of truth for those two values. And if I wanted to, I could go, down here to the operating income one. I could add another data point and go and say that's going to be the canonical source of truth for that piece of financial data. But now that I've done that, if somebody wants to go and change their revenue, like we're going to go and change that. Maybe we go hit 2 billion. Contoso Corp's having a really good year. I can now just go and say, okay, I've just updated the canonical values for those two things. I'm going to refresh and publish those. And what happens when I refresh and publish them is they're encrypted, and that encrypted source of all that data is pushed up into Azure. And now every document, every other spreadsheet, everything I have in my enterprise that wants to reference that data will get that single source of truth information. So we'll do a quick publish. This is off pushing that data to Azure. You can see it succeeded. And now if I jump into Word, and in this case I'll actually use Word in the browser, because these add-ins don't just work in our Windows applications, they work across Windows and Mac and in the browser on the iPad. I can go and say, okay, cool, here's a document that needs those source of truth numbers. So I'll go here and I'll say revenue. I'm going to go put it right here instead of the X. Mapping to that source of truth. I want that Excel demo spreadsheet. I want that GAAP revenue specific number. Maybe I'll change how it looks and say I want it to say 0.7 billions and add. And what you'll see here is that number gets added into the spreadsheet. It is now not just there, it's a refreshable reference back to that source. So anytime that source gets updated, if I now were to jump over to the sheet and change that number again, we could refresh that sheet into the workbook. I can also go here and highlight, and you'll see that all of the places where those numbers are in the spreadsheet or in the document are all highlighted in green, so I know all the data that's bound to that backend. And it really lets me create a super simple solution that creates a source of truth. So for our finance department, I think they told us they spend literally days going and checking these numbers across tens and tens of workbooks and documents. And now with a single refresh, they can go and make sure that every document in the collection has the current source of truth. And we're taking that solution and not just using it internally at Microsoft, but putting that on GitHub, giving it to you so that you can take it, learn from it, customize it to meet your needs, and actually get going much more quickly than building something from scratch. Super cool stuff.
So like Tristan said, one of the cool sessions to go check out if you're interested in this is Daniel Canning's session. On Wednesday, he's going to talk about our industry-specific solutions. So he'll talk about healthcare, he'll talk about finance, he'll talk about legal there. He'll talk about some of these solutions and our general practice and how we work with customers and partners to both develop these and validate them and get them deployed. We'll also have a session on Office UI Fabric, which is our reference solution for building user interfaces that fit in the Office UI design language. And this is a really cool open source library that we have for creating web-based interfaces that meet all the same design guidelines we use in our own products like OneDrive and Outlook.com. Excuse me. And then on Thursday, Mike Gamerlon's going to do a session on reference solutions that we're building within SharePoint, what we're calling SharePoint Community Solutions, that are solutions that do common business processes using the SharePoint framework and modern SharePoint development technologies. So a few really cool solutions on reference solutions in particular.
If you haven't seen Office UI Fabric, just to take 2 seconds, it is an incredibly powerful UI framework. So you saw in that task pane, there's a bunch of commands and fancy controls and list boxes and things. All those are built-in Fabric controls. So all the developer had to do was just reuse all those things from Fabric rather than have to go code a bunch of CSS and worry about the exact web layout of that task pane. So now we're going to jump over and talk about the custom development section. You've seen so far how you can go buy a bunch of stuff from AppSource and Store, how PowerApps and Flow work, how you can go and use our reference solutions, and we're going to publish more and more of those. But then what if none of those work and you really want to get into the meat of custom development? Well, that all starts with Microsoft Graph, as Rob said earlier. And for those who aren't super familiar with Graph, really there's 3 interesting things I like to talk about when I talk about the Graph. The first one is rich context, knowing things like, is this person out of the office? Okay, maybe they are. So then I should probably know who their manager is so that I can route information that should have gone to them to someone who can actually deal with it. Where's my next meeting? What documents are interesting to me based on what I've looked at recently and the people that I work with? It also knows a ton of deep insights. It can tell me things like, as you'll see in a second, what people are most interesting to me. So it knows who I email, who I meet with, who I collaborate with, and can tell me which people are the most interesting, which I can use in things like people pickers. It can tell me who's an expert on a given topic. You'll again see that. I'll demo that in a second. And then the third one is really real-time updates. So there's all kinds of things that happen in Office 365 that are important event signals for the universe, whether it's uh-oh, 2 meetings just got scheduled into the same block. Wouldn't it be great if I could subscribe to an event that let me detect that condition and perform a workflow automatically? Or hey, when a file's changed, maybe that kicks off a workflow. I want to have webhooks. I want to have triggers on all these events. The Graph lets you subscribe to all the pieces of the universe and then run your own custom code in response to changes in all the data and signals that we've got there in the Graph. So we really talk about Graph in terms of also 4 patterns. There's a session on each one of these patterns, so somebody will spend an hour over the coming week really drilling into each of these. But really briefly, the first one is the idea of smart pickers. You'll see that in a second, but this idea that if I know which people are most important to you or which documents are most important to you, I can make it much more quick to choose a document out of a list or choose people out of a people picker. This idea of graph-connected devices. There's all kinds of devices that are generating important data that you want to pipe into Office 365. We really want it to be easy to connect to the Graph and push that data into Excel spreadsheets, into files in OneDrive, et cetera. This idea of graph-powered bots. Rob's got a session on Thursday where he'll spend a bunch of time on graph-powered bots. Some really, really cool stuff that he'll show about using bots to interact with all that data in Office 365. I think we're even going to show a brief one in a couple minutes. And the last one is intelligent business process, right? So like I said, those real-time updates give you a chance to say, ooh, meetings getting scheduled, emails getting sent, all these really important things are happening in the graph. I can subscribe and say, I want you to notify me when that happens so that I can run workflows, so that I can send emails, so that I can do all kinds of things in response to those changes. So now we're just going to show a couple quick demos. First, I want to show you some of the new APIs that are showing up in Graph. So we're constantly adding APIs to Graph all the time. But let's go through a couple of my favorites. And then there's a great session from Yina on Wednesday morning. If you don't know Yina already, Yina is awesome. She knows everything there is to know about Microsoft Graph, and we'll spend an hour giving you a bunch of that knowledge. But let's just take a tour of a couple of things really quickly. I'm going to sign into the Microsoft Graph Explorer, which you can see is just a visual request response tool that lets me issue different requests to the graph and see what kind of data I get back. The first one I can do is say, hey, what people are important to me? And what that'll do, it'll go off and call into Graph and say, hey, this is Tristan. What people are important to Tristan based on who he's working with? And you can see that here's David Moat, one of the folks that works for me, but a long list of interesting people that work for me. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see their details. These are all very smart people who know a lot about the graph. But I can take that query and I can go even more interestingly. I call this the who are my favorite Robs query. So I can say, hey, who are all the people that matter to me who are called Rob?
It better be the top of that list.
Well, we're about to find out. And then let's just give you, so you can see all of my favorite Robs. Let's just pull out their display name. What you'll see is it'll go off, it'll query, it'll filter to just Robs. And my favorite Rob is Rob Howard, of course. But here are all the Robs, and you'll notice they're not all Robs. There's Robbies. If you scroll a little further down, there's Roberts. Because the graph is doing a bunch of intelligent fuzzy matching and saying, hey, who are all the people who might be Robs that matter to Tristan? Same way I can issue queries about Robs. I might want to actually say, hey, who knows about Microsoft Graph? So I'll insert this topic. I'll say, search for me people who have an expertise on the topic Microsoft Graph and give me their names. And it'll again go off and it'll come back with a list of people who are experts on Microsoft Graph. So Ben is one of the product managers on Rob's team who's working with us on this event. But you can see here a bunch of experts on Graph. So pretty quickly you can imagine I can build a smart picker that says, hey, I need to find someone in my enterprise who knows something about OpenXML or Microsoft Graph or PowerPoint slides. It'll go off, it'll look through all that signal it's collecting and tell you, here's a set of people you might want to try to start with. And right there, of course, is Yina, expert on all things Graph. So that's the People API. We're super excited that is going GA and announcing that here at Ignite. The second one I want to show you is an API around SharePoint lists. So if we jump back up here, what I'll do is I'll go say, hey, I want to go to our SharePoint site. But I actually want to go to the demo site specifically. And I want to get all the lists. And what that'll do is it'll go and find, you can see this super familiar syntax if you play with the OneDrive API. It lets me navigate, traverse the hierarchy of all our SharePoint sites. I found the demo site that I've created, and I can go and query what all the lists are. I can just actually say, just give me the display name of those guys. And here's all of the lists that exist. So I can see there's a forms list, a demos list. I'm specifically interested in this Ignite 2017 demos list, so I'm going to go grab the ID for that guy, and we're going to go dig into him. So we'll go, and we'll say, show me that. And you can see, now just by giving it the ID of that list and asking for all the items in the list, it's going to come back again with a pretty simple human-readable JSON payload that'll explain each of the items in that list and give me all the properties, who created it, when did they create it, and most importantly, if I go add on here, what are all the fields in each of those items? So now if I scroll down here, you'll see each one of those SharePoint items, I can now see all the fields that belong to that item, whether they're the custom columns that I created or the columns that SharePoint itself created. It's really cool stuff that lets me go and play with SharePoint. So if I go open that list in another tab, just so you can see what the actual data looks like, you'll see a super simple list that has some of our demos, who owns that demo and whether they're done. Maybe I want to patch one of those things, so I want to change a value in one of those. Let's go and let's go take this demo down here on SmartLink. Let's go find that guy. Actually, let's take the new APIs in Microsoft Graph demo that has ID 4. So I'm going to come up here, and as simply as saying I want this, item 4, and I want to grab its fields. I'm going to actually just choose to update the fields. And I can just say, hey, I want to change it done to true. Not quite done, but I'm going to give myself credit. And incredibly quickly, what I've done is actually by issuing a simple patch command to that specific item in that list, I've changed that value from false to true. I could even go and say, I actually want to add a whole new item from scratch. So instead of patching a specific item, I'll go create a new one, and I'll go grab some samples so you don't have to watch me do much more typing. I'll go create a new item whose title is Awesome Demo, because Rob's going to give an awesome demo. I don't know if he knows that yet. It's going to be great. And it's not done. And again, we'll go and run that query. And what that'll do is...
Post.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Rob. Pair programming at its finest. Click the wrong thing. It'll go and create a new item in that list. And indeed, if I go back here and refresh the page really quickly, what you'll see is not only does that demo for APIs in Microsoft Graph has now been switched to yes, but that awesome demo item's been integrated into the list. So for those of you who are familiar with SharePoint and have played a bunch with the SharePoint APIs to date, you now have a bunch of that power to not go manipulate just sites in SharePoint in Microsoft Graph. You can now go work with lists and all the items and lists in the graph as well. So really cool stuff.
Awesome. So I'm going to show what is my favorite thing that we're announcing anywhere at the conference. How many people have played with Azure Functions? Awesome. How many people have created a webhook for the Microsoft Graph? Not as many. OK, awesome. This is a perfect demo then. So one of the things that we announced this week at the conference is an update to Azure Functions. So there's a lot of new capabilities in Azure Functions, and one of those is the notion of extensions, where you can actually create a bunch of new bindings that are specific to specific scenarios or data types. And there's a bunch of bindings built for the Microsoft Graph, which makes it really easy and awesome to build Azure Functions that connect to the Microsoft Graph and listen to webhooks from the Microsoft Graph. So I'm going to show you in just a couple of minutes how to create, using one of these things from scratch, a new Microsoft Graph webhook, which I think probably would have taken me about 4 hours, Pat. Oh, I got to pay my bill. I think would have taken me about 4 hours in past life. So I'm going to go into the Azure web portal. I'm in an Azure I'm in an Azure function here. This is an Azure function app, Ignite Functions Graph demo. One of the things that you'll have to do if you want to try this at home, it's actually available. You can go try it on your own subscription now. But one of the things that you'll actually have to do is go into function app settings and change the runtime version to beta in order to take advantage of this. So you have to take advantage of the new beta functions runtime. Once you've done that, you can go back to your functions. And if you click New Function, you'll find that in the templates, there's some new scenarios. And in particular, you'll find scenarios for the Microsoft Graph. And these are pre-built functions that will help you do things like connect to the Microsoft Graph and grab the user's profile photo, or handle some webhooks from the Microsoft Graph when a message is sent. So if I click this Outlook webhook handler, it's going to show me a few requirements. You'll have to click through these requirements in order to make sure they're satisfied when you first run it. But once you've satisfied them once for the app, it'll work everywhere. And I can then go name it. I'll call this Outlook Message Webhook Handler. And I'm going to hit Create. And what this has done is it's gone and created an Azure function that has bindings that are specific to an Azure web or a Microsoft Graph webhook. So it's expecting to be called with a payload that is a Microsoft Graph webhook call when a new message is received. I can go and look at the Integrate tab, and I can see that it is a Graph webhook trigger. It's expecting a type message. I can change all of those things if I want to trigger on some other item from the graph. If I go back to the code, you'll see all it's going to do is actually log that it was triggered, and it's going to check the message subject to see if that's the message subject, and if it is, it's going to log a second item that has the message body preview. So this is actually what gets called when the webhook gets called. We have to have a second one because we actually need to register for that webhook. So you'll see if I go back to create another one, you can see Microsoft Graph there, and you can see things like subscription creator, deleter, refresher. I'm just going to do creator. Obviously, if I were doing this for the full scenario, I'd want to refresh them and delete ones when I'm done with them. But just to show you how easy it is to get this up and running, I've now got my webhook creator. And all it's going to do is have a line to create a new GUID, that is the client state, and then it's going to log that this HTTP trigger was hit. So really simple, and again, all of the work is done by these bindings. So if I actually go and look at the advanced editor for the bindings, you'll see it's subscribing to mail folders, inbox messages. So anytime a new item is created inside of that mail, inside of the inbox for the user who registers it, it's going to get a webhook, and it's automatically going to hook it up to this webhook here. So all of the work to wire these things and orchestrate them is handled automatically. I haven't done any of that work, and all of the code you see is the 6 lines of code that are in these 2 functions. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go take this webhook creator, and I'm going to get the function URL. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go to another window to sign in with a different user. And I'm going to authenticate to that endpoint first so it knows which user I am logging in as. So I'm authenticating to this app. I'm going to sign in with this account. Please don't send me any too crazy mail. I'm now signed in, and I'm just going to call that same webhook URL. So what this should do is it should call into the Microsoft Graph, and it should register the webhook that I created as my second function as an endpoint, that every time a new item shows up in this person's mailbox, it should then call that other function and process it. So let's go back, and let's look at what was in the other function. So remember, this is the one that should get called every time a new item is created in my inbox. It's going to log this item in the logs down here. And then if the demo contains this demo Azure Functions, it's going to log the body as well. So I will go in here. I'll send a new email to that email address. And I'm going to make the subject that one. This should show up in the logs. And I'm going to hit send. And what you'll see is this notification will go into the Microsoft Graph. You can see that the mail was already delivered, so that was pretty quick. That should then fire a webhook, which then goes and calls this other function, again, all of which was orchestrated automatically. And you can see this should show up in the logs, is showing up in the logs based on pulling that out from the webhook. So without writing a single line of code, I now have a fully hooked up webhook running in Azure Functions, and I can go write whatever custom business logic I actually want to implement when a new mail is sent. Now that's pretty cool. Like I said, this is actually my favorite thing that we are shipping at Ignite, and it's available now. If you go flip over your Azure Functions into beta, you can go and try it out yourself. I really think that the whole idea of serverless computing and Azure Functions is spectacular. I love it, but it's even better when you have interesting data and interesting triggers to work with, and that's why the bindings are so awesome, is it connects the Microsoft Graph, all the data, all the triggers that make serverless really compelling, really easy, very easy to implement at your fingertips. Awesome. Oh yeah, we're going to this machine. Back to the deck. Okay, so we got a bunch of new announcements around the Microsoft Graph. Like Tristan said, we're kind of continually shipping new things. One of the things that people are most excited about is we're actually taking SharePoint lists to GA. So all the functionality that Tristan talked about or demoed to now use the Microsoft Graph to interact with SharePoint lists throughout SharePoint Online is now generally available. You can use it in your production applications. We've added file version support, so in OneDrive and in your SharePoint document libraries, you can interact with file versions. Outlook rules are now GA. The People API that Tristan demoed, which is so useful for a variety of scenarios, you'll see it come up a couple more times in the talk. That's also GA. And then we continue to add a bunch of new beta functionality, things all over Outlook, rules, categories, time zone languages, rooms, email headers. And every few months, we're always introducing new functionality in the Microsoft Graph. And if you go to graph.microsoft.com, you can see a full change log every month of the new things that we ship to keep up to date with it. In addition to all the new data, we continue to ship new functionality. App-only support is now supported in OneDrive, so you can use the Microsoft Graph and you can make service-to-service calls without acting on behalf of every single individual user. You can also now access shared calendars, contacts, and mail folders in Outlook through the Microsoft Graph. And then you saw the demo of the Graph extensions for Azure Functions, which, like I said, is my favorite thing that we're shipping at the conference. That's now available in beta. Something wrong with this? Won't touch it. Okay. And as you can see, we love the Microsoft Graph. There are a ton of Microsoft Graph sessions. There is a Microsoft Graph session that'll go deep into using Azure Functions. Jeez, what's going on? I don't know if it's me. I don't think it's me. There's a session down here, let's see, Modern Business Process with the Microsoft Graph and Azure Functions that Dan Silver is doing near the bottom. That one is talking about Azure Functions, and all the stuff I demoed there will be featured heavily. Yina's got an awesome session on building smarter apps for Office using the Microsoft Graph. So it talks really generally about the Microsoft Graph, and Yina knows more than probably anybody at this point about the Microsoft Graph. I'll also plug, I've got a session on Thursday. Folks from Busy are going to come as well, and we're going to show a really, really cool bot connected to the Microsoft Graph there, so come and check it out. I'll save that one for then, but it's going to be a fun session on Thursday morning. There are a ton of cool sessions. Vittorio Bertocci, if you haven't seen him, if auth is confusing to you, if it was confusing what I just did on the AAD thing, Vittorio does a better job than anybody I know about explaining how auth works. So he is the best person to explain to you how you connect to the Microsoft Graph there. So a bunch of sessions on the Microsoft Graph. I'm really sorry about the flickering. I don't know. OK, so I'm going to hand it off to Tristan. He's going to talk about how you can extend our canvases.
Yeah, so you heard us talk about Graph. So you've seen us kind of talk about Graph. Now we want to talk about all the things you can do on our canvases. And really what you'll see is 3 common threads across all of those different canvases and those extensions. One, everything is built on web technologies. If you're familiar with HTML and JavaScript, if you can go and write web code, building an Office solution, plugging into our canvases is just reusing those skills. The second one is that everything is cross-platform. So you saw that I showed that SmartLink demo, and I showed it running first in Windows, and then I jumped over to Word Online. Every single add-in that we're building, or that whole add-in framework, is built to work across PC, Mac, in the browser, on iPad. We just announced support for Outlook for Android. So we want to make it so that you can build a single solution and have it run across all the places Office runs, regardless of what platform or host that is. The third one is modernizing distribution. We'll talk about this in more detail right at the end, but we've made it incredibly easy once you've built these solutions to either put them in the Office Store or App Source if you want to release them to other customers, so if you want to build package software, or to put them in this thing we call the Office 365 Centralized Deployment System, or the Organizational Catalog, which lets me say, hey, I've built SmartLink. I want to deploy it to all the finance people at Microsoft. So all I do is I take that add-in, I upload it into Office 365 Admin Center, and I say, I want to associate that with these people or this set of Outlook groups. And as soon as those people log into Office, SmartLink will show up in their ribbon, and they'll have all the functionality needed to use that add-in. They don't have to go install MSIs or grab COM add-ins off a share. They're just logging into Office, and because we know who they are, we know which solutions we want to give them automatically. So Rob showed the 3 canvases, the document canvas, the conversation canvas, and the page canvas. We'll talk about each one in turn. So you can kind of think about the document canvas as the core canvases you're used to in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. We have a great model called Office Web Add-ins that is our modern web-based extensions for custom content and for extensions on those 3 applications. And we also have the embeddable canvas of you can take our online applications and embed them or use them as editors against your own storage as well via our Cloud Storage Partner Program. So let's just jump into a bunch of demos, because I think that's the best way to show some of the really cool work we've done here. The first thing we'll show.
Show Mac this one.
This guy. Oh, he switched to that.
I switched it trying to
when I'm not looking, Rob moves things. He's sneaky. So the first thing I'll show is, again, with Excel, we're making a really big push as a team to give you all the APIs, all the capabilities you need to build incredibly powerful extensions. So if you've been following, you've probably seen that over the months between Build and Ignite, we've added more and more JavaScript functionality to the API in Excel. I'm really excited that we're knocking off a couple of the really most common user voice requests. So if you go up to user voice, the first thing I'll say is officespdev.uservoice.com is a great place to go log feature requests, because you're not just screaming into the wind. The team actually spends a bunch of time looking through this list, understanding what you're asking for, and building as a result of those requests. Here's one that somebody sent in last year that said, make the named item collection editable. So we saw that, and if we jump over to Excel, we've actually done that. So I'll jump back in here. I'm going to use a tool called ScriptLab to show you. ScriptLab, is everybody here, has everyone seen ScriptLab? Is that familiar to anybody? Oh, you're going to be so excited. ScriptLab is this incredibly powerful add-in that we've built that actually lets you look at, edit, and play with our JavaScript code right inside of the host applications when you can see it. So for example, we've published for almost every new API we've added a simple snippet that shows you how that API works. I don't know what is happening. All right, well, I'm going to keep going because I want to talk about this. I want you guys to hear it. So there's a session later in the week. We'll show it in a second, and if we don't get to actually show it, Sudi, who's sitting just back there, I can see him sneaking into the session, is our expert on all things Excel, and really the depth of the Excel APIs, both in JavaScript and up there on the web through the Microsoft Graph. He's going to spend a bunch of time going through the additions we've made to that JavaScript API and all the new things you can do in Excel. We've made that named item collection editable, and if we get a chance, I'll show you a quick script that shows how that now works. We've also added range hyperlinks. We've added the ability to get the file as a base64 encoding. We've just made a ton of enhancements to that Excel API to give you a bunch more power in the things that you can do and how you can work with Excel's canvas in your own extensions or your own custom content. And that is getting worse, isn't it? Rob and I are doing real-time cable surgery. No luck? Sorry? All right, so they're going to take a second and try to get this fixed. We're going to pause for like 2 seconds. And even that is flickering. I think that means it's not us. I don't know if that's good, though. Anybody have any questions? We can actually use this period if folks have questions. We would normally do questions at the end, and I will stick around for as long as folks want to ask me questions when we're all done. But if anyone has any questions right now, feel free to use our time, ask Rob and I anything. If you have brain teasers. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So
we have microphones.
About the
Our mics. We have microphones for
yes.
Q&A.
I'll repeat the question. He was asking the question about in that smart link solution, what happens if someone's editing the Word document, they actually go change the value rather than getting the one straight from Azure. We actually protect from that in 2 ways in that solution, so it came up with our own finance team. What you would have seen if I tried is I'm not allowed to edit those regions. They're actually locked inside of that Word document, so the only way they can be updated is via code. And then anytime that I need to, as soon as I refresh, it will blast anything that's in there. So somehow someone got around that protection. In this case, they can't. Those values would constantly be updated from the server when the user opens the document. It's a great example. SmartLink's a really interesting, great example of, we had exactly that discussion with finance, right? We got to dig into a real customer problem inside Microsoft, build a solution that we think actually solves that problem, and then take it and give it to all of you to go and play with and enhance and customize to go do something interesting. Sure.
Can you connect to Microsoft Graph using external APIs?
Can you connect to Microsoft Graph from other APIs? So, Microsoft Graph can be accessed either on behalf of a user or on behalf of an application. So if you have your own API and you want to go connect server to Microsoft Graph to attack and get at any of the data and do something interesting, that's totally possible. We have a bunch of great partners who are doing exactly that today. Or accessing the graph as an application or accessing on behalf of a user, pulling out data, building those smart pickers, building those graph-powered solutions all over the place, absolutely.
So graph services are able to go to connect to Exchange or Make. So graph API is the direction to go?
Yeah, so the question was, is Graph sort of the way to go if you're used to connecting through Exchange Web Services or ActiveSync or any of the other existing APIs? The answer is yes. You can think about Microsoft Graph as sort of the superset single cloud API, not just for Outlook, not just for OneDrive, but for all of Microsoft. So we've really said, if someone needed one API to access all the data in Microsoft 365 and the Microsoft Cloud at large, let's go design a single consistent API for getting at all that data and letting them play with it in interesting ways.
Hey!
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Oh, no problem. Chipmunks.
All right, do you want to You want to quick show the Excel thing?
Yes, we're going to go
Okay.
super quick because I want to show you a bunch of this stuff. You can probably tell Rob and I are super passionate about Office stuff, so I can't help but show you a bunch of cool things that we've got going on.
I think it's 5.
So we're going to jump back here and we're going to go real quick. All right, so Script Lab. Like I said before, you can go find Script Lab in Office Store. It's an add-in that my team built that lets you play with and edit JavaScript code right here inside of Excel. So you can see a ton of really awesome samples that illustrate how you use all the various APIs that we've built. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see a whole section called Preview APIs, which shows the latest and greatest. What's the stuff we're just rolling off of the presses into our beta channel. The first one I'll show you is updating a named item. So when you now have APIs, if you look right here, you'll see I can now go get a worksheet, grab a range, create a named item that describes that range, one of the most common things folks do in the Excel COM API today. I can also go and find, if I scroll down a little further, existing named objects. So here I'm going to go and say, hey, find me the name called myRange, load it up. I can go and either find out what range that is, or I can change it to a different range on the spreadsheet. So another really powerful piece of Excel that we're bringing over to the JavaScript world. The larger thing I want you to hear is we've shipped version 1.5 of our APIs this summer and 1.6. We're putting version 1.7, which will include this stuff in beta imminently. We're constantly adding capabilities. You can go and see me run this really quick just to get a sense of how this works. Please go to user voice. Please go to GitHub and see the specifications for this stuff. Send us comments, send us feedback. The team really does design all of this stuff directly based on the feedback you're giving us. That user voice item made us say, hey, we should prioritize that. And you'll see, I think Sudi's actually going to go and mark it complete in user voice. So I won't steal his thunder. He's our user voice guy, but he'll go off and show that off in his session. But here you can see I can add sample data. I can go and call that add named item. So now that range, you'll notice up here is called myRange. And I can go and call that update code. This is no longer myRange. It's now moved down here. So I have all the ability to go and work with named ranges, work with range hyperlinks, a bunch of new powerful capability exposed in the JavaScript object model. It's really cool stuff.
And if you haven't tried it, if you want to play around with any of the document canvas stuff with web add-ins, ScriptLab is a really awesome tool. It's a web-based IDE. It's got IntelliSense, a bunch of samples built in. It's easy to build a gist and share it with a bunch of people. It's a really cool way to play around with it.
I love ScriptLab.
And it doesn't feel nearly as cramped when you use a normal resolution, not the one we're presenting with here.
Second demo I want to show you might be my favorite thing that we're doing. So if you saw Rob and I talk at Build, you heard us talk about one of the most common scenarios for web add-ins is, hey, there's a user signed into Office. I want access to that user's identity, both because I want to sign them in to my own custom solution and because I want to turn around and call Microsoft Graph, right? So I want to be able to access all the data in Graph from my add-in as Tristan D at Microsoft.com or whoever the logged in user is. I'm super excited to announce that at the end of October, the single sign-on API for web add-ins will go GA. The store is going to start accepting submissions that include support for single sign-on, I think today. So you can go and start building this stuff and submitting it. Really exciting. Doing SSO is literally as simple as calling get access token async. When it succeeds in the result, you'll have a user token. And that's just our standard JWT that you can go and both use to sign the user in, or you can go and swap on the server into a token you can go and use to call Graph. So really simple, cool stuff that lets you sign in on behalf of the user. And you can see here really quick, we already have partners who are using this stuff. Office at Work is a really awesome partner who's built an integration with Office. They've taken that, and what you can see is I just clicked on their task pane. I didn't get prompted to sign in. I didn't get asked for credentials. But not only did they sign me in through that single sign-on API, they then turned around and called Microsoft Graph. So all of those pictures, all that text is stuff stored in my OneDrive that they were accessing through the Microsoft Graph API on my behalf automatically. So I can go and build really powerful experiences. Rob and I sometimes call them graph-powered add-ins that leverage the single sign-on API to not just access the data in the canvas, but also all the data up there in the graph as well. And that works both across Mac. And if I jump over here in the browser, you'll see that that very same solution with no code changes works in the browser as well. So again, you saw how quickly it signed me in. If I look, it's signed in as Tristan D. And there's that same set of pictures and text things that I saw on my Mac also working in the browser as well. So a really simple API, but an incredibly powerful way to access the Microsoft Graph from add-ins and to make it really easy for a user to sign into your solution without having to write a ton of code. So cool stuff. That's probably my favorite thing. I love single sign-on. The last one, and maybe this is a close second in things that I love, is how many folks have built solutions on top of Excel today? Some, a few. How many folks have built custom functions in Excel? So does everybody, for those who don't know, I think the most powerful thing you can do in Excel is you can actually take the function library that we've shipped and add your own custom functions. So I can go and create the equals Tristan function. It does something amazing. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, and I can add that in so that it looks just like all of the built-in functions that Excel themselves ships. So one of the things we're really excited to announce, and there's actually a whole session at 9 a.m. tomorrow that'll dig into this in a bunch of detail, is support for those custom functions in JavaScript. So that dev preview starts, I think, in a couple of weeks. By the end of October, you'll have bits in the Insiders Fast channel of Office 365 that'll let you go build custom functions using simple JavaScript, and those custom functions will work in our Windows client at first, but will rapidly work across Windows, Mac, web, iPad, everywhere you'd expect them to work. Good? Oh. Let's see if unplug.
Custom functions only work in skinny mode.
Yes, they're very skinny custom functions. But what you'll see here, first, let me show you what a custom function looks like. Is that readable, mostly? To define a custom function is just a really simple chunk of JSON that says, here's the name I want it to have in Excel, here's the description I want the user to have of what it does, and here's the name of its parameters, and a JavaScript function you should call whenever the user types it into the canvas. So you can see here a really simple one called testUDF. It takes two parameters, A and B, and if I scroll all the way down, all that function is the world's simplest function. It just multiplies the two together. But that's written all in JavaScript, so it's not just something that works on Windows. It's a portable function that will feel like all of Excel's built-in functions and will work across all the places the user wants to run Excel. If you take that to sort of the next level, you can imagine that maybe I want to have a bunch of custom functions for my chocolate factory that measure data coming from IoT devices. So maybe I want to have temperature sensors on each of my pieces of equipment that tell me the status of those pieces of equipment. So I can go and write a custom function. In this case, I wrote one called cFactory. You can see this getTemperature function. It tells me what it does, returns the temperature of the boiler, mixer, or furnace. And if I go and reference mixer, what it'll go off and do in JavaScript is call off, get the temperature of that device, and put it back into the canvas. So super cool stuff that lets me integrate the Excel canvas with, you can imagine anything that produces data, whether it's a temperature sensor, maybe it's a wind sensor, any sensor I have in my environment, I want to bring that data into the place where my users do analytics in a way that feels like Excel, right? It's just using the formulas and functions that Excel is known for. I can do that across all of these, and you can see I'm pulling data from each of those three things. If that's not enough, the functions also support the idea of streaming. So I can say, hey, I don't just want that function, I want you to update it automatically every second. And now what I've got are custom functions that are using that JavaScript API to go off and pull those temperature sensors every second and pull that data into Excel. And all I had to go and do was write the JavaScript that knew, here's the API I should go and call, and here's how I should pull it back into the document. So incredibly cool stuff. And you can kind of see that refreshing in real time. I could hook that up with any of Excel's native functionality. I could add conditional formatting, I could apply charts, all the fun stuff you might want to do on top of that data once it's in Excel.
That's pretty cool.
I think so. And you could see it.
You can think of some of the Project Yellow stuff where you saw in the keynote earlier this morning, Excel understanding stock and being able to treat that as a data type that's different than a string or a number. Now we're teaching Excel a bunch of new formulas to go along with that, a bunch of new functions to go along with that. So now you can teach it new data types and new formulas, and you can do it in ways that are really tailored to the needs of your specific business or your specific application. Awesome. So, you done with this one? This one?
Go
This
ahead.
one? Which one?
For now, that's good. So there's a bunch of sessions. We won't go through the full list, but we'll put it up just for a second so you folks can see all the sessions that are coming up and all the announcements that we're making across that document canvas in general. Like I said, Excel, we've done version 1.5 and 1.6 of the JavaScript API. We've done that single sign-on API. We've got a bunch of stuff coming as well. If you have time tomorrow at 9 a.m., I would highly encourage you to go to the session on custom functions. That is really the keystone of Excel programmability. Super exciting that we're finally getting that to you folks in the modern platform.
Awesome. So we're going to talk quick about the conversation canvas. We're going to go quick. We lost a little bit of time, but I'm going to try and make sure we get through all the content. When you think about the conversation canvas, the kind of core experiences for it are inside of Outlook, Teams, and Skype for Business. The way you extend conversations is with technologies like connectors and bots that are able to interact at a conversation level. You can also create custom content that's embedded in those conversations through things like actionable messages, which hopefully you've seen before. And then you can take the conversation canvas provided by Skype for Business, and you can actually embed that in your own applications. Dan will talk, for example, tomorrow about some healthcare scenarios built on virtual healthcare consultations using the Skype for Business SDK. So we've got some really cool capabilities with the conversation canvas. And we want to show a partner that's built some very cool integrations on top of that conversation canvas, in particular SurveyMonkey, who's worked really closely with us to build a few different types of integration. So the first thing that I'll actually do is I'll show SurveyMonkey's web application. So this is a test environment. What you'll see here is actually rolling out to SurveyMonkey over the next few weeks. So everybody should be able to take advantage of it soon. They're also rolling out support for single sign-on with Office 365, which for a lot of these integrations is the kind of basis for the most seamless user experience. So you can imagine if I'm using Office 365, if I'm using an Office 365 account to log into Teams or inside of what other application my experience is embedded in, I'd like to be able to log into all the other applications that I want to use with it. So I'm going to log in with my Microsoft.com account here first, and you can see I've got a few different surveys that I'm interacting with. One of the things I want to show before I show it inside of the conversation canvas is inside of those surveys, if I go to Design Survey, you can see that there's a capability to actually ask people in my organization for feedback. You can ignore that for just a second. It's a preview environment. If I go to preview and test this survey, for example, I can take this survey preview and I can go to other people in my organization and ask them to comment. When I do that, there's a capability to invite those people. There's a capability to invite those people that's powered by that People API. So what this is doing, remember Tristan before was saying, hey, find my favorite Rob, and it was using all the signals about who he communicates with, who he meets with in order to find that person. This is using the People API to suggest all the people that I've worked with on surveys. So it's actually putting at the top of the list the people that I'm most likely to interact with. Or if I type in Tristan, it's able to guess that Tristan is probably this Tristan as opposed to other Tristans because it's using that People API now that it's signed me in with Office 365. So that capability to first of all make a seamless user experience to just have one username and password, but then second of all take advantage of the context and the insights that's in the graph to have a more seamless experience within your web app is a really key piece. Within Teams itself, though, they've built a few different types of integrations. So this is the Teams experience. For those of you guys who haven't tried it, I would definitely recommend it. It's our new persistent chat application inside of Office 365. If you've got Office 365, everybody's got a license to Teams. Teams has a bunch of teams inside of it and then channels within that where I can have persistent chats. I can do all the things that I'd expect to. You saw this in the keynote this morning. But there's also several different ways that you can extend the conversation experience with your own custom functionality. One of those is tabs. So I can take things like conversations, of course, but I can also track files or other components within Office 365. So you'll see things like Power BI, PowerApps, PowerPoint presentations there. But you also see things like SurveyMonkey. You can take a SurveyMonkey tab and you can embed that within this channel. So I can say, hey, in this demo conversation, I actually want to, with the people who are part of this particular group in this particular channel, have a conversation about this survey. I want to look at the survey preview. I can have a Teams conversation alongside it, alongside this third-party web application. It automatically signed me in using that same account because they're supporting single sign-on, so it feels like a seamless experience. I can look at the results as the results start to come in, and we can have conversations about those results in line with the team, in the team where that survey was built and is most relevant. So directly in the context where users are having their conversations, you can also have conversations about these third-party applications. SurveyMonkey also took advantage of the bot capability, which is, like I said, one of those conversation-specific extensions. So I can do things like I can mention SurveyMonkey, And it can tell me here are the things that I can do. For example, I can ask it to create a poll, and I can say, what's your favorite color? Or what's your favorite demo? We can say SSO or Azure Functions, clearly the right one. Or the cool screen effects for the best part of the day. Got a winner. And I can send that to SurveyMonkey, and the bot will actually come back and say, okay, I'm going to create a poll on the fly for you. And it lets me configure it. So I can say I want to make it anonymous, or I want to hide the results so that not everybody sees it. Or I can just go ahead and say, yeah, I want to open that poll to the people in the group. And now everybody can actually go and start to vote on these. I can say, hey, my favorite was Azure Functions. And it will automatically use this notion of actionable messages to have a rich visualization of that, automatically created, tailored to this particular experience, so it can show me the results. Oh, Tristan voted for cool screen effects on the side. He's in the same group I'm in.
Gotta have some.
It can even update them in line. So if I change my mind and I say SSO was my favorite, it'll go in line. It'll automatically show me a feed of those interactions and then update those results. So you can see directly in line in the conversation, I've got a bot that's interacting with me in the group that I'm a part of. It's able to create these rich custom pieces of content like a poll simply by taking some JSON that describes the question, it describes the possible actions and how to connect them together, and then we do the hard work of sort of representing that on the different form factors where Teams shows up so that you get a good experience tailored to each one of those places. So you can focus on the functionality that's unique to your application. So you can see that SurveyMonkey, together with that single sign-on support, because I'm able to use a single identity to interact with their application, I can have a seamless experience for interacting with their tab directly inside of my conversation, inside of my group. I can interact with their bot in order to create a quick real-time poll and see the results from that as well. I can even use connectors so that when I've posted a survey, new responses are either sent to me in a digest or on the fly every time a new response comes in, so we can have a conversation about each one of those that go in. So we'll move on real quick because we're running out of time. Tristan responded, I got robbed of dang it. I was tricked. I didn't really like SSO as much as I liked Azure Functions. Definitely Azure Functions was the best one. So the last one that I want to show in the conversation canvas is a really quick one that's a call out for graph and bots. This is one of my favorite ones. This is actually based on a project that Richard Dizarega, if you know Richard Dizarega, he does a bunch of awesome work in the Office developer community. He built a project that is a quick starter. It's at richdiz/Microsoft. Well, actually, there is an AKA URL. This is the AKA URL. If you want to go build a bot that's connected to the graph, definitely go check out this URL. Check out my session on Thursday. Check out Richard's session on Friday. We're going to talk a lot about this. There's some really cool things you can go do with it. But Richard had an awesome starter project that makes it really easy to wire a bot up to the graph. And what I did was I took that, and over the last couple months, I have been extending that with stuff that I wish that I had a bot that could do my secretarial work for me. So this is literally the bot that I have sort of been building piecemeal in order to make my life easier. And I'm actually going to run it in Visual Studio, and I'm going to open up the bot framework emulator in order to show you what it looks like. And this emulator is an emulator that I can use when I'm developing a bot, but I can publish this same bot to Teams. I could publish this same bot to Skype for Business. If I really, really wanted to, I could publish it to Slack, but I wouldn't recommend it. So you can publish it anywhere when you go build something connected to the bot framework. And I can do things like find all PPTX files. And this bot is actually going to go and use Lewis to understand what I'm asking it to do. It's going to recognize that this needs me to sign in. So it's going to go and get a token on my behalf. It's got a cache token already. There's a sign-in library that is able to do that. And it's going to go and grab all the PPTX files in my OneDrive automatically and put them in this card format back in the reader. And this is actually what the sample does out of the box, so you can see that. The functionality that I added to it was some things that I really, really wish that I had something to do all the time. So for example, where's my next meeting? So if you're on the go, you're trying to find where your next meeting is, I've got my, actually, we ran out of time on this meeting, so my Ignite press briefings are next in a secret location, so you can't see where that is. But it tells me my next meeting automatically by reading from the graph my calendar item that's coming next. I can do things like find time with Tristan and Mike. So you can see it's going to use the people API, and it's going to say, which Tristan did you mean? I meant that Tristan. Which Mike did you mean? And I meant this Mike. So it's using the People API to find the right one, and then it's actually using the Graphs Find Meeting Times API to find times when everyone's available and suggest them to me. I can click that, it'll go off and send a meeting invite for that time and block it on all of our calendar. So some really kind of cool things that you can do when you take a bot and you connect it to the graph and you get that context. And we'll go through a session on this where you can see a bunch of this really deeply on Thursday. Awesome. That one was cool, right? Beg for applause now.
Yeah.
So there's some really cool things coming in conversation canvases. We just launched add-ins for Outlook Android a couple of weeks ago, so they're generally available now. We now cover all of the platforms Outlook runs on with add-ins. Adaptive cards that are even more flexible cards for those actionable messages where you saw the poll are coming soon. They're being previewed right now inside of OA. You can see a session on that shortly later in the week. We're now supporting Gmail accounts for Outlook add-ins. We also are taking a connector web part and making it available in SharePoint. So those same connectors that you're using in order to insert new conversations inside of Outlook and Teams will be able to be embeddable inside of a web part inside of SharePoint soon. So here's some conversation canvas sessions. I definitely recommend checking out the Teams session tomorrow morning. There's a lot of really cool developer stuff going on in Teams. There's a really cool bot session that Richard DiZarega is giving, developing enterprise bots with Office 365 on Friday. Some really cool stuff going on there. Quite a few sessions around this notion of conversation canvases. The last canvas we have is the page canvas. The core experience is inside of SharePoint. You can extend pages with SharePoint Framework extensions, and you can build custom content in SharePoint pages with SharePoint Framework web parts and add-ins. I'll show you a super quick demo because we're already out of time. This is a SharePoint site experience. I'm going to go create a new site. I'm going to go choose a team site. One of the problems that we've had with SharePoint Framework, with SharePoint library configuration, is we don't have a way to say, hey, on all of the sites that you go create that match this criteria, I want to go and apply these extensions, and I want to go add these libraries and lists. So we have this new notion of SharePoint site designs. I'm just going to do something totally unimaginative because we're out of time. I'm going to go, hey, say next. Yeah, I want to go create that. We're using our fast site creation, so it's actually already gone and created that site collection under the hood. And you can see that as it's created on the right-hand side, this site design is running, and it's actually doing things like initializing it with a new list that has customer tracking inside of it, new event collateral, and a theme for Contoso travel. So it has this design that it's applied to the SharePoint site. This is a really cool new capability. Sean Squires is going to do a talk later in the week that will dive into that. I think we've got it on here. There are quite a few new things coming in the page canvas. SharePoint Framework web parts are now supported on-prem through Feature Pack 2. SharePoint community apps are coming out. Check those out later in the week. This is taking these SharePoint technologies and showing you how to build them into common business app scenarios. SharePoint Framework extensions are going GA shortly. Our OneDrive file handler that allows you to add new capabilities to file types inside of OneDrive. And then SharePoint sites and SharePoint site designs and site scripts, which I just showed you, are now in preview. You can see Sean's session tomorrow afternoon. There's several really cool sessions on SharePoint development overall. Dan Kogan tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock is going to give SharePoint development on the enterprise, which is the kind of broadest overview session around SharePoint. Definitely recommend checking out those sessions if you're interested in SharePoint. We are over time, so we're going to kind of blaze through the acquisition and deployment and just go tell you to go visit appsource.microsoft.com, and you can get your own demo on how you can see the latest experience for going and browsing applications, packaged applications that you can go and get for Office 365. If you're an admin, it'll link directly into our centralized deployment capability. If you're an end user, you can acquire it for your own use within an organization. Go check out AppSource. If you're an ISV that's publishing applications, I definitely recommend checking out AppSource because we now support lead sharing through that channel. So if you publish an application to AppSource, you go into Seller Dashboard and you configure your CRM. With the customer's permission, of course, we're going to give you their contact information so you can follow up with them and make sure that they get everything that they need around your solution. You can see here an ISV inside of their own Salesforce CRM getting a bunch of lead information about specific customers and contact information around them. It works both for Salesforce and, of course, it works for Dynamics CRM as well. For acquisition and deployment, the O365 admin store is now generally available. This is where you can go and acquire solutions directly within O365 admin. Office solutions are now also available in AppSource, and in fact, if you go to store.office.com now, you'll actually be redirected to AppSource so you can get that experience. We're previewing centralized deployment for Outlook add-ins, so we cover a broader set of technologies there. We've got more analytics for people publishing add-ins inside of Dev Center. And Teams now has a bunch of new capabilities to publish applications and allow lists for managing the applications that are available in an enterprise. So a few sessions in particular on AppSource to go check out. And then finally, hopefully you guys got a sense of the breadth of what is all available in the Office 365 platform. Sorry about the screen difficulties halfway through. I appreciate your patience with that. Hopefully you have an idea of the ones that are interesting to you, how to get started with them, or what sessions to go see to learn more. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week with Ignite. Please do take the time to give us evaluations. We really do want to learn from you how we can do better next time, so please take the time. And then the one last thing I'll give you is go to dev.office.com as your next step for learning about all of these technologies. And we've got 2 specific things as call to actions there. One is we've got a developer boot camp where we have 30 or 40 events worldwide. Hopefully everywhere you are, there's a boot camp going on soon. Go to AKAMS 0365 Dev Bootcamp to go sign up for one. And go to AKAMS Office 365 Hackathon to sign up for our worldwide virtual hackathon that's going on for the next 3 months and kicking off today. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the Ignite.